good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure today to introduce Charlie Prunkl. Charlie is a senior here at Clemson with a major in economics and a minor in political and legal theory. Throughout his time at Clemson, Charlie has been a member of many organizations such as the Clemson Sailing Club, Clemson Undergraduate Student Senate, and the American Enterprise Institute Executive Council. He is also a member of the Knowles program and is a volunteer fireman at the Corinth Shallow Fire Department. This last detail, I'm sure, comes as no surprise to many of you here. However, most relevant to this event, Charlie is a member of the Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism and the Lyceum Scholars program. It is through the Scholars program that I first met Charlie almost 4 years ago in our first class together, and I've been friends with him ever since. Throughout these 4 years, I've come to know him as not only a good friend, but also as someone with an expansive knowledge of history that loves to learn about anything from U-boats and whaling to social contract theory. He possesses an impressive ability to not only understand, speak, and write about complex philosophical questions, but also to positively impact the personal lives of those around him while doing so. The thesis that he will present shortly is titled Quality of Speech in the Digital Age, and I know that with his knowledge and passion for the subject, it will be a pleasure to listen to. Without further ado, please welcome Charlie Prunkl.
Thank you. I just gotta get my timer up so I don't take up too much of y'all's time. Thank you, Dodson. That was really, really kind. I also want to thank everybody for being here today. It means a lot to see so many friendly faces who've kind of helped me out through my time here at Clemson and to come out to support my research today. I want to first thank the Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism and the Lyceum program. For without them, none of this would have been possible today. I must also extend a gracious thanks to my thesis advisor, who's back there, Dr. Daniels, who has spent with me countless hours over the last year talking about my ideas, helping me refine them. And over the last 3 years, I've known Dr. Daniels, and he's been just a wonderful mentor and educator. I would also like to extend a special thanks to my unofficial advisors, Dr. Gross and Dr. Bunn, who have absolutely had a hand in helping me craft this thesis. And I also extend one final thanks to all past and present faculty. You've absolutely made me into the man that I am today. So thank you so much. So why did I choose this topic? I chose this topic, Quality of Speech in the Digital Age, because honest discourse and the exchange of ideas is how we as humans are able to describe what is true, good, and beautiful. Speech is the vehicle we use to get from point A to point B. The road there is tough, and therefore we need a vehicle that is made of quality parts that will not break apart upon this bumpy road. Being able to have quality discourse with each other is the mark of a good citizen, and creating good citizens is part of the mission here of the CISC. Therefore, my research this year comprised of understanding what is good speech, how do we measure it, and how do the environments and mediums affect the quality level of speech in society. Now, I think it'll be helpful to kind of lay out some terms today, and that I'll be using in today's speech. So what is speech? Speech isn't just what I'm doing right now, which is giving a speech, but speech is the ability to communicate an idea. Therefore, you can think of how speech could be a book. I communicate my idea through a book. I communicate it through an essay, radio, telegraph, for anyone out there. But so now, what is quality speech? What is good speech? I believe Socrates answers this best in the Platonic dialogue titled The Gorgias. Socrates describes good speech as truthful, clear, humble, open to inquiry, and guided by ethical principles. It should aim not only convey information, but able to foster a genuine understanding of wisdom and moral growth. These are the characteristics one needs for good speech. I will also use the term medium a lot today. I take this term from Marshall McLuhan, who was a 20th century Canadian philosopher who dedicated most of his life to the study of media. Think of a medium as a system or a channel of communication. I communicate my ideas through a book, through an essay, through television, through the internet. And what Marshall McLuhan believes is that the medium is the message. That somehow, if I communicate either through a letter or a television, a medium will somehow change the speech that is received to you, how you process it. McLuhan also further categorizes speech into two specific kinds of mediums, a hot medium and cold medium. You're good. A cold medium is cold because the medium itself does not do any activity. Let's think of a book. A book just sits on your shelf or sits on your desk. To understand the book, to understand the truth within the book, you have to act upon the book, and you have to do so, and you use your reason and rationality to understand the gaps that the medium does not necessarily provide. Cold mediums encourage rationality and encourage thought. Hot mediums get their name because they are active mediums. They act upon us. Where your book sits on your desk and you have to act upon it, the television acts upon you. A television is an example of a hot medium. And it spoon feeds you information, and it requires minimal participation. And oftentimes, these hot mediums invoke your passions rather than your thought. So that is why my speech is titled today, Quality of Speech in the Digital Age. We know what speech is. We now have defined what good speech is. Now we're going to explore how the digital age, the medium of the internet and social media, have affected our discourse. So what is the problem at hand, and why should you care? The problem is that the medium of the internet, mainly social media, reduces quality of speech in society. And the reduction of quality of speech reduces an environment that facilitates the ability to think critically. This is a problem, as thinking critically allows us to determine what is true, good, and beautiful. Therefore, a society that lacks the ability to think critically may lead people to believe in ideas that are false, not good, and not beautiful. And ideas have consequences. And the internet facilitates bad ideas. And bad ideas can tear apart societies and lead to death and destruction. So pretty gloomy stuff. But yet, this is not the world that social media promised us. Social media firms like Facebook promised to make the world better. In his 2012 letter to investors, Mark Zuckerberg believed that Facebook was, quote, extending people's capacity to build and maintain relationships. And I think we know this is just not the case. The Pew Research Center has noted a continual trend in increasing political polarization from 1995 to 2020. There's been a mental health crisis in young people. As leading social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has called my generation the anxious generation. And worse yet, in 2017, Facebook was accused of being the platform and the vehicle for the Myanmar army to commence a genocide against a minority population, the Rohingya, which resulted in the deaths of 25,000 people and a displacement of over 700,000 more. If Zuckerberg was right, the 2.5 hours the average American spends on their phone each day would have increased connectivity and moved the country together. But this is just not the case. So now I will attempt to paint an overview for you. I will attempt to answer the question, how and why the internet has reduced quality of speech. And I will try to do this in 3 ways. First, the internet has flooded the market with cheap speech. Second, a large portion of speech consumed on the internet is through a hot medium. It invokes your passions. Third, the incentive structure of social media firms work against the production of quality of speech. So we'll begin with my first point, that the market has been flooded with cheap speech. This term, cheap speech, is taken from Eugene Volkoch's 1995 paper, Cheap Speech and What It Will Do. And in this paper, Dr. Volkoch tries to understand how the medium of the internet will affect discourse. Eugene Volkoch is a legal scholar at UCLA and is known for his scholarship on American constitutional law. The term cheap speech describes the internet has drastically reduced the price of producing speech. No longer do you need an editor, a publisher, or a publishing organization, a printing press, labor for all these different entities, labor to distribute a distributing service. Now you can be the author, the editor, and the publisher, all for the price of having access to the internet. It has been almost an elimination to produce speech. If you want to get your ideas out to the world, all you have to do is get onto your phone, or even like a public library computer, and there, almost instantaneously, you've spoken to the world. It's a massive reduction in cost. So how does then cheap speech change the environment? Before the internet, television and newspapers had to try to get large bases in order to maximize profitability. They had to appeal to middle of groups. They had to put out a product that was in some way orthodox. I think Fox News is a good example of this. I know a lot of people think of Fox News as something that is kind of divisive, but Fox News did have to put out an orthodox product for its viewers. Fox's viewers are made up of fiscal conservatives, evangelicals, libertarians, and neocons. I don't have to tell you that some of these groups don't necessarily all agree with each other. So they had to create a product that all these groups would like. It was a middling effect in some way. What cheap speech does is causes a mass splintering. Every group now can filter their news through their own specific lens. This explains in part the rise in groups such as flat earthers, QAnon, and even ultra-specific sexual orientations. All groups can find a home on the internet. So how does this impact the quality of speech? It impacts the kind of speech we have as hyper-specific lenses reduces the things we have in common. This is not to say that the leveling of speech or the cheap speech is inherently a bad thing. However, discourse may be more difficult as common understandings about issues are no longer present. I think a good example is if anybody here has been following the Ukraine war or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you may have looked at a particular event, and then if you may have looked at like a particular event, and then you may have talked to someone about such like a particular event, and you may be surprised that you may not necessarily understand the event in the same way. The facts are completely different, their understanding of the event is completely different, and you may come to think to yourself, maybe I just don't understand the other side. What the massive splintering has done is that there's now just not one other side or two other sides. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of very unique viewpoints about issues. And this is now, and if we don't have kind of a common understanding about the facts, we can no longer have discourse about those kind of those particular events. And so that's one kind of way that cheap speech affects discourse. So my second point is that the internet has been flooded with speech that invokes passions rather than reason. So I will now kind of defend my belief that McLuhan is right, that mediums do affect discourse, and that hot mediums and cold mediums, there is something tangibly different between them. So I believe print facilitates good speech as it encourages the consumer to first think and then to do so linearly and logically. It is unsurprising to me that the age of reason arose during the age of print. Print encourages increased attention span, increased word comprehension, and the engagement of complex ideas. The television and the internet do the exact opposite. Having to focus on a book, to act on a book, one has to be patient, and one has to focus one's attention. The television, on the other hand, fights to keep the viewer. It fights to keep your attention, and it does so with bright scene cuts, catchy music, and bright visuals. This makes viewing television pleasurable, as it's easy. It does the work for us. But yet, even commercials hurt our ability to understand the sequence of thought and also to focus our attention. And so I think an example of this is if I'm giving my speech right now, and a Colgate commercial comes up for the next 5 minutes, and then I have to come back on afterwards, I would then have to kind of restate my point and kind of what I was saying. I would have to kind of restate my point, and that breaks up the sequence of thought. And also what it does is it hurts our attention span. If we think of our brain like any good muscle, if we don't use it, it atrophies. And as my PE coach always used to say, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And so if you're not focusing your attention span, and what the television does is it reduces that, then it can be harder for you to use your attention span in other aspects of life. And so that's how the television has kind of reduced our attention span. I also believe word complexity has gone down. If we were to compare large religious leaders of both print and television, I think we can kind of see this. So Jonathan Edwards was a pastor during the First Great Awakening, and this is in the 1700s. And I believe that Jonathan Edwards, and I can argue about that with anyone with this later, is a much more complex writer and thinker than that of the late, great televangelist Billy Graham. Now, this is not to disparage my Billy Graham fans in the audience, or Billy Graham himself, but it is hard to engage in a complex idea when the medium of the television doesn't necessarily facilitate it. So for those of us here who think about Jonathan Edwards and Billy Graham, when you think about Jonathan Edwards, you think of his ideas. You think of maybe his most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. When you think of Billy Graham, you think of his face. You think of him smiling either at the Yankee Stadium or during one of his late night crusades. You see Billy Graham, you think of Jonathan Edwards' ideas. And so this is an inherent reduction in our ability to maybe to think critically, as we can be more easily influenced by, say, Billy Graham, like how his posture, his sight, his the way the medium of the television influences us. And so that's how I believe there's been a regression, as we're not focusing solely on thought anymore, but also on the visuals. We have moved from a medium that encourages us to think rationally into one that makes us think with our eyes. And another example of this, I believe, is to look at the comparison of the print age debates and some television debates that have happened. In the age of print, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas in 1858 held a series of debates throughout Illinois as they were running for election. Their debates lasted 7 hours. Now, I imagine most of you would not like to listen to me speak for 7 hours. I would not also like to speak that long. But in the age of television, the first ever televised debate between Kennedy and Nixon lasted only 1 hour. 30 minutes were given to two men to explain to the country how they planned to lead the most powerful country that had ever existed on the face of the earth. Only 30 minutes. And the age of television, gone are the days of the presidents of the rotund William Howard Taft and the short yet brilliant James Madison. Presidents now must fit the medium. They must look presidential. They must be tall. They must be fit in some capacity. But I believe we should be worried as this, because if we pick people based on the medium, on the visuals, on how they make us feel, when complex problems arise, we want people in office who can think complexly. And the mediums inherently, by invoking our passions, may choose us to choose leaders who are not capable of doing that. My third point is this. The incentive structures of social media companies reduce quality of speech in society, and the fault lies with the nature of the firm and the nature of who we are as people. So all firms are created to exist to maximize shareholder wealth. This is just a simple fact. You start a business to make money. Facebook, Instagram, and all other free platforms make their money off of the collection and sale of gathered user data. And they sell this data to advertisers. This is why these platforms are free, but yet they're some of the largest and most profitable companies in the world. Social media companies have employed algorithms and reward systems that keep the users on their platforms. Think of like the bell notifications, likes, streaks. I think streaks is a perfect example of this. All of these things are done to encourage the user back onto the platform. And they give you the illusion of reward. And the more time you spend on the websites, the more amount of ads you can see, and the more information is collected to better target future ads. Now, I believe this is an open secret. Most of us, I think, know that we are the products of these social media firms. But why do we allow ourselves to spend hours and hours of our lives on something that we know is where inherently the product we're the product? And I believe that is because we're ultimately creatures of habit. If you've ever taken a standardized test or a long exam, the ACT, SAT, or as my roommate did, the MCAT, you will know how drained and exhausted you are afterwards. Constant attention and solving problems makes an individual exhausted. This is because he or she is expending energy to bring together past information and to make sense of a problem. And this goes against the physiology of our brain. Our brains are made up of neurons and miniature electrical highways. As we all know from physics, electricity takes the path of least resistance. This was what makes us efficient. We're able to recognize patterns. So when I walked into the room today and I saw a chair, I know what to do with the chair. I'm supposed to sit in the chair. I'm not supposed to throw it out the window. But also, it makes us efficient in the sense because it's trying to reduce the amount of friction within the brain so that when you walk to class every day, you probably all take the same path. When you sit in class, even if there's no assigned seating, you'll always most likely sit in the same spot. This is because we're reinforcing the highways within our brain and reducing the friction. This is why learning is so difficult, because when you're trying to learn something new or solve a problem, you're building almost an electrical highway in your brain, and that takes energy. And thinking makes us exhausted. And so this is why social media is so attractive. The algorithm shows us things that confirm our biases, confirm the highways we've already built within our brains. They invoke our passions rather than reason, because reasonable thought and thinking critically is a tiring thing. And so if we activate our passions, there's a greater chance of you staying online. And the goal is to ultimately reduce the amount of critical thinking you're doing. The platform that is more effortless, the better it is. And that is the danger of social media. It is sugar for our mind and makes us bloated and lethargic as we don't activate our reasoning ability, right? We're not focusing our attention span, right? We're just scrolling, and it can be very hard. There is no room in between reels for you to focus, for you to think critically. You're inundated with massive amounts of information. And that makes us lethargic. So now the critic might say, I wish Dr. Turner was here, because he's definitely be the critic of this. He would say that, Charlie, that's very nice that you've said all this, but haven't people always been awful? Even during the age of print, quality of speech broke down. I've put up this cold mediums as something great, but yet, if we look even the age of print, things necessarily weren't always great. A good example of this, I think, is the 1824 election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's wife was attacked through the media, or through the news, of multiple different things, and it led to depression, and as Andrew Jackson said, led to her eventual heart attack and death. Andrew Jackson responded with a smear campaign against Adams, accusing him of a plethora of awful things. One in particular accused him of being the pimp for the Russian Tsar when Adams lived in Russia. So yeah, pretty awful accusations being thrown around. So I do recognize, Mr. Critic 1, that things have been awful in the past. I can also hear a second critic saying, Charlie, this is all great, this argument you're making out. I can see the difference between the book, something we must act upon, and the television, which acts upon us. But can you really say that anything is different from the television to the internet? That Pew Research data you gave in the beginning showed that polarization was increasing from 1995 to 2020. But social media really doesn't take off till around 2008, or you could even push it back to 2012. So there's a period from 1995 to 2008 where the country was getting more polarized, yet the influence of the internet wasn't great enough to facilitate these things. So how can you really say that the television is different from the internet? The television has the same market pressures as the internet. The 24-hour news cycle, or any show, makes money off ads. It's the same way social media does it. They both make money off commercials and ads. Both sensationalize news. The 24-hour news cycle, it tells sensational stories that make you afraid, scared, upset, angry, to keep you hooked, to invoke your passion rather than reason. So how can I say anything is different? So I answer my two hypothetical critics. And I will say, yes, there is something different. We are living in a new age, in a new medium. And the internet is different in two ways, in degree and in kind. So first, in degree. Everything wrong with the 24-hour news cycle, its sensationalism, its lack of context, its reduction of the attention span, is dialed up to 11 on the internet. It's the same old problems we've been facing, but just more so. The internet facilitates bad behavior. I think one way of explaining this is to focus on the sensationalism, which has been facilitated by the increase in scale of the internet. In the late 90s to early 2000s, 3 big news companies dominated the airwaves: Fox News, NBC, and CNN. And they were all competing for your attention. So it's one firm against 2. And they're trying to be more sensational than the rest in order for you to choose their network. Now, instead of 3 big companies, or maybe the hundreds or thousands that existed during that time, it's the 5.35 billion humans with access to the internet. Now, when one wants to stand out, they don't have to be more sensational than maybe 100 or 1,000 different organizations. It's millions, if not billions, of people. So one has to be more sensational. I think this definitely has facilitated the rise of certain political personalities, such as AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and even certain internet personalities as Andrew Tate. They definitely thrive on this level of medium. Breaking news stories usually lasted around about 30 minutes, and they were there to explain very complex issues, only about 30 minutes. But now, breaking news stories have been replaced with 30-second videos that are just thrown online with maybe little or no context. So the problem with understanding the world through context has been definitely reduced by the internet. Attention spans were hurt, as I mentioned, by commercial breaks and screen cuts, breaking our sequencing of thought and our attention. But now imagine a feed of a constant loop of only 30-second videos. This is your TikTok and Instagram. So your attention span, which is already hurt by the television, is drastically hurt by only focusing your attention for less than 30 seconds on average. And my second point is that the internet is also different in kind. Television, you passively consume. You'll watch the pundits yell at each other. Then you might get heightened, emotionally heightened. Then you might go tell your neighbor, oh, did you see, person X said this about issue X? The internet is similar. It puts a fun little twist on it. The internet is similar because, yes, you're watching something that disgusts you or makes you upset, and it heightens you emotionally. But then what it does is it immediately invites you back in to produce content. You now become the pundits yelling at each other. And the reason I say content over discourse is because when you're heightened emotionally, it can be very hard to produce good speech, which requires you to be humble and open to new ideas. I don't know if any of you have been mad before and then tried to have a new idea put upon you. It doesn't really go very well. So, and the internet culture is also high speed. And I did throw a meme in here just to explain. I think that it kind of encapsulates what the internet culture. If you were to ever, this is a meme that began to exist in 2020, and it says, I'm not reading all that. And it was often you would find this under, say, like a political post, and someone would post maybe like a 400-word essay trying to explain the issue at hand. And without a doubt, underneath, someone would be like, not reading that, bud. And I think this kind of perfectly encapsulates the culture of the internet. It rewards sensationalism, things that invoke our passions. Because if you're on this device, you're scrolling, and you see an essay, no, you're not going to read that. This is not what it's here for. It's neither humble nor open to inquiry. And I think Renee de Rosetta, who's a research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory, I didn't know if anyone knew else that was a thing, says this about Twitter. Twitter is not a public square. Twitter is a gladiatorial arena. And the incentives of this platform are not to have nice crowd conversations about cats. Now, I think we can kind of understand why Twitter is a war zone. The reduction in the cost of speech has caused massive splintering, in views, as ultra-specific groups can gather and produce their own information quickly and cheaply. Now, this is not an inherent problem. As we've seen since the printing press, as printing has become better, it's become cheaper, and more voices can be heard, right? The cheaper it is, the more voices can speak. So this is not inherently a problem. And I am a good pluralist. What is a problem, though, is that these groups gather much of their information from a medium that is a hot medium that encourages passion rather than reason. We are becoming a diverse nation based on passionate thought rather than reason-based thought. And the diversity of thought based on passion is encouraged by our desire to confirm our own biases, and by the profit motives of the social media firms recognizing this. These are the forces that are working in tandem to reduce quality of speech in society in the digital age. And with that, I'm willing to take any questions. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, if you want to raise your hands, I can call upon you. Will.
First, Charlie, that was absolutely awesome.
Well, that makes me feel good. Appreciate it.
No, I found what you said really compelling, and I'm just about to delete Instagram off my phone.
No, yeah. It's pretty awful stuff.
When you were talking about the difference in degree between the intelligence and the internet, you were talking about how each person travel something, and it used to be just competing with 3 major news sites and maybe 70,000, but then compared to everyone's got access to the internet, so now you're competing with millions of people, if not billions. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on, and this might even just make it worse, the fact that maybe the speech on the internet isn't as free and equal as you might have painted, or at least I took away from what you talked about. like speech on the internet is still controlled by these massive
Yeah.
corporations. If anything, maybe it's now like 3 entities like YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, right? And
Yeah.
when you think about like these people have to, they're not competing just like with the other people to just come up with these crazy stories, but they also have to fit the narrative that like the social media website wants to put and to publicize.
Yes.
So maybe if you just wanted to expand a little bit on like, there's a difference in degree, but there also still are these like major corporations that it's not like everything has just been released to the masses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's some like filtering process that comes through. So I think one way you can think about it is that the internet is something new, right? These platforms are something new. And if we look at the case law surrounding these firms, it's, I think the best, I forget the particular name, but newspapers have editorial powers over their, over like what they produce, right? You can't just be some like crazy person and just be like, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal. You have an editorial process. What the internet does, what these social media platforms then is, that'd probably be like what the case law they would fall under. And so it's kind of hard to say you don't have editorial powers over your platforms, right? Because the First Amendment is going to be protecting you against government censorship, not necessarily private censorship. But right, there seems to be something wrong, right? Because so many people are communicating now through these mediums. And so it almost seems that, it's not a newspaper, right? It is something kind of different. But I think the problem gets trickier. So say like COVID, a lot of, I think, conservatives are upset about maybe like the lab leak theories being pushed down. And a lot of people are saying, oh, the government was, forcing social media companies to do that. But what you saw is that a lot of these social media firms like Twitter and Facebook, they actually went to the government and they're like, hey, like what do you think is true right now? And so they're asking for advice from the government. And so what's complex about that is, can we prevent private organizations to ask the government for advice, even if it's against kind of like certain political beliefs? Because if Facebook right now wanted to say censor all liberals or all conservatives, I mean, they have the right to do that as a private organization. But there's something there's something new about this. And what that is, I don't know. It's very difficult to put into words. I'm sorry, Will. I wish I had a better answer than you, but that's kind of how I think about it. Any other questions? Andrew.
So you mentioned that you're a good pluralist and you wouldn't advocate for raising the cost of speech. But other than that, are there any alternative options you encountered or thought of yourself to try to encourage a return to more frequent media and things like that instead of social media and
Yeah, so I think about this. I didn't include this in my talk today because it's a lot of information. It's a very large topic. But when the printing press was first invented, right, when the book was first invented, it caused, it in many ways helped facilitate the Reformation. There's 22 large religious wars. There's a lot of chaos. But the book as we see it today is not really the book of the past. There wasn't a title page, indexes, or even page numbers. So these are almost like categorical inventions that happen throughout the book's lifespan to help us kind of understand the information within it. And so the internet, I think we also have to recognize, like the book, isn't a finished product. And the mores that develop around the book the 100 years after the printing press, we're also going to develop mores around the internet. I think one kind of maybe example is that you see Facebook, Twitter, and these organizations creating Facebook groups, group kind of organization. You're not just like in a massive public square, but you can kind of like go into almost like kind of like almost like a forest gated community. And I think Reddit is kind of an example of this, where like r/cats. You can't be posting pictures of dogs in r/cats, right? You kind of have a specific purpose of why you're in there. And so maybe different kind of categorical inventions of, oh, this is where this kind of discussion will happen in here, or discussion will happen in this area. Because if we were to have this conversation like out in the public, out in the streets necessarily, you might some crazy person who doesn't really regard the rules well, and just might come in and start yelling at everybody. So kind of putting up, a small amount of barriers and raising the cost that way. Just like maybe you need on Reddit, you need a certain amount of like likes, karma as they call it, to post something on certain platforms. That could be a possible advantage, but I think that it is a problem because you see on Reddit pages such as like r/politics, it's very much kind of a very liberal organization, like a group that anything remotely conservative will get downvoted or like be kind of pushed to the bottom. So it's not a perfect system by any means, but I think it's definitely a better system than we see in, say, like I think Twitter. So that's, I guess I'm hopeful that we'll develop more ways and that these categorical things will kind of develop. I would like to be hopeful. So, any other questions? Matthew, what would you like to say?
Do you think the rise of long-form podcasts is due to the backlash from the lack of good discourse,
I love long-form podcasts. I definitely, McLuhan would say that's hot media, right? It's still like impacting it on, like it's still, you're still passively consuming it. I think Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast, I even think Joe Rogan in some way is, giving ideas the space they need to breathe, I think is an advantage. And this is, I think podcasting would be in some ways a reaction to say, this instantaneous news, or, you might see like a news article and it's like 4 paragraphs. It's like, there's nothing of substance in here. What are you writing about? So I definitely would agree. There is something there. Anybody else? Or did I just kind of solve everybody's problems? I would really like to think I did that. Jeb.
So I had, in your talk you mentioned the difference between hot and cold media.
Yeah.
Cold media is act upon like a book. But I think often people think of social media as maybe like comparison to TV. They think there's something that they're interacting with,
Yeah.
that they're participating in. Is that sort of interaction different from the interaction that we have with the book? How does that make social media still more of a hot media? Just what you could expand.
So, do you mind restating your last portion? I'm not sure I quite understand.
So social media is something we interact with more than like TV, right? So
Oh yeah, we're interacting with the internet, and we're
why is it still hot media?
Yeah.
We're acting upon. Right? What is the difference?
And I think so. That's kind of what I kind of try to talk about at the end, where the internet or social media doesn't necessarily fit completely nicely into McLuhan's kind of hot medium versus cold medium, right? It is something different. That immediate invitation back in to produce content is kind of how it makes it different. You just don't see something like that. I think, yeah, you just don't experience that with a book. I think one example is like media has always kind of influenced, even like dog breeders realize this, like the type of dogs people buy. And so, but with the internet, it does something different, right? Where if you buy maybe, I forget, what's the dog breed you mentioned? It was the Blue Heelers, there you go. They're very popular right now due to social media. But where it twists that is that now with the dog, if I make an Instagram account for my dog, I can monetize this in some ways. And so that's something that would like, yes, you're influenced by the media to maybe get a particular dog, but now it puts it back around. You're like, I want to create this media as well, which is this like axis right here didn't necessarily exist as easily as it did in the past. Hope I answered that. Thank you, Jeb, for the question. Dr. Bunn.
I think I'm very sympathetic.
I know.
I have a question, I guess, about McLuhan generally, because he's making a pretty strong claim, right? To say that the medium is the message.
Yeah.
Basically, whatever idea I'm wanting to put out, whatever medium I put it into matters far more than whatever idea.
Yeah.
So he has this idea that, like a super galaxy, right? That the invention of the printing press didn't just change the way we make and see information, it changed the way we think and the way we literally see the world. It changes our brain and our brain. So I'm fully agree with that, especially when you're talking about community developing some sort of apparatus for the internet that does interact
Yeah.
better, like we did this apparatus for the book. Is there any hope within this medium that we could make it something different, or are we stuck with whatever medium message is being given?
I'm not as like predestined with the as McLuhan says, like if you put something in this medium, it's going to act this way. Because I think like, so if we think about the Reformation, those ideas that Martin Luther posits, like no veneration of Mary, only 2 sacraments, those already existed, and with other heresies that from previously, like Peter Waldo most famously, and the Hussite kind of heresy, if we choose, for the Catholics calling them heresies. But so those ideas were already present. What the medium does, or what the printing press did, is allowed it to become cheaper to like kind of actually gain traction, to spread more quickly. I think medium is the message, but it definitely facilitates things. Like because of the printing press, these ideas were able to get out and gain a farther reach. I still think they work in tandem together. And then I have thought about the podcasting, and like there are different categorical inventions that are happening on the internet that allow us to kind of see the world. And I think institutions like the Lyceum program, which is ultimately focusing on reading great books, focusing on understanding like what is true about the world, and thinking critically, these kind of institutions are kind of, I think, the real shining spots for our country. So. I wish I had a better solution. I would have written a book if I figured it out. So, Renee, or Janae. Sorry, my apologies. That's embarrassing.
That's how we allow ourselves to be products of social media and selling it because it's passive and getting good for passion. I was wondering if you had any secondary hypotheses.
Well, yeah, I think it's like they've invented something that is kind of perfect for our vices, right? In the same way, like, I think we may have read articles about how casinos kind of are able to like keep you there. There's no clocks. They put a lot of oxygen in there. There's a lot of bright lights. They spend a lot of money on sound design, things that we're really responsive to, and those kind of aspects are very much found on social media. And it's tailored to us, right? It's like, my Instagram feed is hilarious. Like, it's awesome. Like, I love my Instagram feed. I love it way more than I should. That's why I deleted Instagram. Like, and so like, why is it addictive? Because it's the perfect honey trap for us. And was there a second portion to your question? I think that's yeah. It's just because it's perfectly designed for us. Yeah, it gives the illusion of success. Matthew.
Do you think that it's possible to have a productive medium with technology like on smartphones, or do you think the only solution is to return to books?
I don't think we can. I think the society now has become too integrated with technology. So and also like markets are now more efficient. Better like health data can transfer. So there are a lot. So I didn't talk about it. There are a lot of benefits to the internet. There's now massive archival research. A lot of free books online. I guess how I would say is that I think there has to be. I think I can put it this way with this little anecdotal story. So in the 50s, President Eisenhower suffered a heart attack, and in that heart attack, the country kind of came together and realized that. What causes heart attack? Was it fat or sugar? And there was massive debate between the FDA, like what should we ban? And they ended up choosing fat. Fat was the villain. That's where we get low-fat items. And so that in part, like what makes food flavorful? Well, it's fat. So by putting sugar into food, that's what kind of added the flavor. And that's where we kind of, with a bunch of other factors, led to part in the rise of the obesity crisis. And so, but I think we see now in young people that, Coke has noticed that a lot of young people don't drink sodas. They're producing these like very low sugar sodas now. because people are realizing like, oh, this was actually poison for my body. So, no, I mean, you can pour it on your windshield to like disintegrate whatever gunk's on your windshield. Like, if you're putting that into your body, that's awful. So, I think especially our generation is recognizing that fact that we've seen like, okay, if you're 600 pounds, you're not making it past your 30, when you're 30. So, there's mores, I think, developing around recognizing that. I think we should recognize that the same aversion we have for like casinos, like, okay, maybe I'll go to a casino once or twice, but I know what this is now. We now need to be able to put those kind of labels upon like Facebook, Twitter, like, this isn't a public square where we have debates. This is where like you go yell at people if you're pissed off. So I think like understanding what these things are and how they really affect us are going to actually be kind of maybe, again, developing the mores around it. The concern is, we're right at the cusp of AI. So can we develop these mores in time before, we can't even believe, this video right now? I mean, so I didn't have a lot of time to research AI because there's not a lot out there on what its effects it's having. So it's, that's how I would kind of answer your question. Thank you, Matthew. Do we still have time for another question? Or if not, if everybody's satisfied, we can.
Oh, what?
Yeah, okay. Dr. Thompson.
Yeah, what a strange world when the boomer is defending the internet.
Uh-oh.
And social media from so I think you mentioned earlier your talk that one of the effects of the internet and social media is a splintering of political discourse.
Yep.
And I think I took you to mean that that's not a positive thing. So let me just push back a little bit and ask if it's not the case that the printing press and the internet and social media is actually democratize political discourse and giving voice to the voiceless in society, whereas prior to the printing press and prior to the internet and social media, people certainly of a certain social, economic group were largely excluded from political discourse. And now basically everybody.
So I think what I said about the splintering is I am in favor, I am a pluralist. I am in favor of like people being able to kind of have a voice on the internet. What I think my inherent problem is that the mediums in which they're discussing or which they're speaking upon the internet are necessarily hot mediums that invoke their passions rather than reason, right? It's not the fact that more people are able to speak, but it's why are they speaking on, like, what's motivating them? Is it like, I have a very good, interesting thought? It's more like, oh no, this is something that makes me mad. And I think the internet, I may have been a little simplistic with, like, I really focus on like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think Substack is kind of an interesting, almost like a gated community that you can talk in, right? Like people who subscribe to a certain thinker, like maybe the redneck intellectual. You'll return back and see the same people commenting. And so there's like a through line of almost like a little community in there. You don't necessarily see that on Twitter, right? It's a much more violent place. So within the internet, there are different things that I would say rank better. But inherently, I would say the best way is, you got to touch grass, you got to meet people, you got to shake hands, got to be face to face. Like, I mean, that's what life is. So this is a tool. This isn't supposed to become your life. So yeah, I am for like the democratization of speech. I don't want to sound like only one truth that must be preached. So yeah, that's how I would answer. Okay, we have Andrew and then maybe Matthew and then probably wrap it up. Okay, let's do that.
Maybe a particular of what you're talking about, but do you think there are wider long-term psychological damages that come from social media? I've heard the argument that I'm sympathetic to it, that like humans are not really wired to know everything that's happening all the time around the world the second it happens. And there's kind of overload of the access of everybody talking all the time, and
Yeah, well, I think it is different, right? Because maybe, you know, you can't watch a 24-hour news cycle, right? Something that is supposed to try to keep you there and make you afraid, you know, plague on your anxieties, right? If it's red, it sells, or if it bleeds, it leads. What the internet now does is, like, throughout the day, oh, another awful thing happened in the world. Oh, another awful thing happened in the world, right? Even though, you know, it's a beautiful day in Clemson and you're walking around and it's great out. But now you're like, it's a constant reminder that, you know, somewhere out in Kansas, something like bad's happening. It's like, you know, Kansas doesn't really bother you right now. You know, it's not like the most important thing. And so it kind of takes you out of the moment. And I think there is something about that, right? It is causing like a massive anxiety because like the weight of the world is constantly on your shoulders, you know, and you can't enjoy a nice day at Y Beach anymore. So I think there is that. That's what I mentioned Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a really great book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. And his most recent work was The Anxious Generation, where basically he said, you know, we just gave phones, this new technology, to a group of kids. We didn't really know what it was going to do. And I think, you know, the constant comparisons on social media, there's a lot of predatory problems that I think we're now, kind of now in 2024, really starting to like, kind of really get a grasp of what effects has it done. I think, you know, even COVID, like the Zoom generation, right? You know, you're doing classrooms through Zoom at like 4 years old. What does that do to a person, you know? If you're not, you know, bumping into people, interacting with people.